So, when teaching about the Holocaust, the history of the Holocaust, uh, this is in part a element of U.S. history. And the reason is that the United States was a country whose people were gradually becoming aware, even before the Holocaust started, that Nazi Germany was not a place where anyone would want to be a Jew. Were the people of the United States sympathetic to European and German Jews in particular? The evidence is pretty clear that the answer is no. And one of the most dramatic examples of this was the episode of the passenger steamship, the SS St. Louis. In May of 1939, the German government chartered an ocean liner, a German-owned steamship, the St. Louis, and they commissioned the ship to carry slightly over 900 German Jews as passengers across the Atlantic to a place of refuge in Cuba. These German Jews were people who were selected for the trip because they had enough wealth and means to be able to buy their way out of Nazi Germany. Free immigration from Germany was not available to just anyone, and part of the challenge was wealth, and part of it was finding a country where they could find safe refuge. And many countries in the 1930s were very averse to accepting immigrants strictly on economic grounds. The Great Depression was going on at the time. Lots of people had difficulty finding enough work to support their families, and so there was resistance to immigration, and that was very much true in the United States at the time. The complicating factor, of course, was the widespread presence of anti-Semitism. So, we see the evidence of this unfold in the episode of the St. Louis, which set sail in May from Germany and crossed the Atlantic and arrived at the port of Havana a few weeks later, and there the German Jews who were on board and who believed they held valid visas to land were denied entry. It turned out that the issuance of their visas to enter Cuba had been issued under fraudulent circumstances, and the Cuban government was unwilling to reverse the decision. The ship languished in Havana harbor for about a week, and then its captain was eventually forced to weigh anchor and set sail and try to find some other place to disembark his passengers. No country would accept the German Jews. He tried, and with the assistance of the Anti-Defamation League in New York City, tried to find another destination for these passengers who were beginning to grow desperate after having been so hopeful about their prospects. These were women and children and men and complete families. The nations of the Caribbean all said no. The nations of South America said no, and the United States also said no. The SS St. Louis steamed up the east coast of the United States, right along the coastline of our state of Florida, within sight of the shoreline. As its passengers looked out at the lights of Miami and the buildings along the barrier islands of the east coast of Florida, they saw the place that almost everyone in the world would want to escape to and find refuge. That was not available to them here in the U.S., partly on account of the grounds of fear of job loss or competition from jobs, but partly because of anti-Jewish sentiment among the population of the United States. The ship was eventually forced to return to Germany. It actually returned first to Europe, to the port of Antwerp in Belgium, and there all 900 of the Jews were disembarked, and a deal was struck so that 1/3 of them went to France, 1/3 to Belgium, and the remaining 1/3 to Great Britain. Those passengers who wound up in France and Belgium were eventually swept up by the Nazis after they invaded Western Europe, and they disappeared into the concentration camps of Germany, and there most of them perished. The survivors were those who escaped to Britain, but in every case, the German Jews, the refugees, had to promise that they would not seek employment and that they had the means to support themselves in the countries that accepted them. The Holocaust is a story that cuts across national borders, and in this case, its impact on U.S. history is one that reveals a not very positive and, in fact, rather shameful aspect of U.S. history. When we think about the history of immigration law and the feelings that we have toward people from other nations and societies that are trying to find a place for refuge, it's helpful to remember the story about the SS St. Louis and the tragedy that befell those hundreds of people. When you look at newspapers of the day in 1939, at the time of the SS St. Louis, you can find that the American people knew about this story at the time. They read about the story of the St. Louis. They knew what happened. And in many cases, in that same newspaper, for example, in the Washington Post of the day, you can read a story about the SS St. Louis, and in that same paper find real estate advertisements for houses for sale and apartments for rent, with the advertisements in the classified section explicitly saying Gentiles only. It's evidence of the anti-Semitism that was given free and open voice in American society at the time. In the Tampa Tribune newspaper, I found a story about the SS St. Louis right next to an article about a national meeting of the Ku Klux Klan organization in Indiana at the time. These were the years that led up to the Second World War, and these were the conditions abroad all across the world that gave Germany the confidence to feel that it could dispose of its Jewish people exactly as it saw fit, without interference or even legitimate criticism from foreign societies.